As we turn to Luke chapter 12 today, I want to make a bold assumption. I want to make a bold assumption saying that I guess that none of you have ever felt anxious about money before. You've never lost any sleep because you were concerned about how to make ends meet. You've never gotten up at 2 a.m. because you were fretting about unpaid bills. Is that assumption correct at all? No, it's not. Of course it's not. We've all worried about money at one point or another. We have all worried about money at one point or another. Just the other night, I woke up a little after midnight with a racing heart and a pit in my stomach because I was apparently worried about a minivan. Yep, you heard me right. I woke up in the middle of the night worried about a minivan. Chris and I have been talking about purchasing a minivan with 3 kids. You know, you got certain needs that you have to meet, and a minivan, when you're the parent of 3 kids, seems like the biggest luxury that you could possibly invest in. But my subconscious mind apparently thought midnight would be a good time to wrestle with the question, how could we possibly fit the purchase of another car into our budget? So I woke up in the middle of the night absolutely terrified about that. Maybe some of you have had a similar experience. Perhaps you're feeling that way today. Maybe you're feeling stressed about money right this very moment. Maybe when I talked about giving earlier this morning, you were shaking your head saying, Matt, we have nothing left to give. As I said last week, 2020 was a tough year for a lot of different reasons. On top of all the health concerns surrounding COVID, many of us have been confronted with harsh economic realities and financial concerns as well. You barely make ends meet as it is. You live on a tight budget as it is. But then COVID hit, and maybe your retirement fund tanked, or maybe you're in the group that lost a job and has been unable to find work since then, or maybe you bought way more toilet paper than you should have. There are a lot of factors that probably have compounded in the past year to make money one of the key stressors in your life, and I can relate to that. Money is definitely one of the key stressors in my life, too. In fact, there was a survey that was conducted last year by Capital One, and this is what that study found. It says, Americans are generally worried about money, with many feeling that they can't effectively control their financial challenges. The survey found that 77% of Americans feel anxious about their financial situation. 58% feel that their finances control their lives rather than the other way around, and 52% have difficulty controlling money-related worries. While retirement at 68% is the chief money-related worry, rising cost of living at 56% and debt at 45% are other major concerns. Have you ever thought about why it is that we worry about money so much? Obviously, money is a necessary part of life, isn't it? We have to have money to pay for the things that we need, including shelter, food, and clothing. I think it's also fair to say from a biblical point of view that we need money to do the things that we enjoy doing, the recreational activities, the hobbies that we enjoy. I don't think the Bible has any issue with people who spend at least a portion of their income on things that extend beyond necessities. But statistically speaking, it's really interesting to compare Americans versus the third world around the globe. Even the poorest in our country still have more resources than people in other parts of the world. In fact, we're not even talking about the third world. A study conducted in 2019 revealed that the poorest 20% of Americans still consume more goods and services than the national averages for all people in most affluent countries. So we're a rich nation full of people who are living in perpetual anxiety about our money. Why? Well, part of the problem is we have a tendency to overspend on non-essential items. I know that's true for myself. As I said, I don't think the Bible has a problem with us spending a reasonable portion of our income on luxuries, but the key phrase there is a reasonable portion. We Americans, unfortunately, have a tendency to spend unreasonable amounts on things that aren't necessary. I was amazed to find out that the average American spends $18,000 on non-essential items every single year. That's a lot of money. Now, this is an average. That might be more or less than you spend. But non-essential items are things that you don't necessarily need to survive. They're the luxuries in life. Coffee would be considered a luxury item. I just about need coffee every single day, so it's kind of on the edge there of a necessity versus a luxury, but just so you're aware, something like coffee would fall into this category. Okay? One of my professors at Denver Seminary, his name is Craig Blomberg. He's a New Testament professor, really profound guy. He knows his stuff, and I look up to him a lot. He wrote a really good book on money and the Christian view of money a few years ago. It's called Christians in an Age of Wealth. And in that book, he actually argues that overspending isn't just an American issue, it's a human issue. He says, as human beings, we obsess over possessions. The very poorest of us strive desperately to acquire at least enough to survive. Those with only their basic needs met naturally want more in order to provide a cushion should times get worse. The middle class remains discontent because they see people with so much more, and the affluent compete with their peers in countless contests of material one-upmanship. The truly wealthy worry about how to invest their resources because mere savings may not keep pace with cost of living increases. So that's part of the problem with our anxiety over money. We spend more than we need to spend. We want more than we need. But the other part of the problem, and I think it's the bigger part of the problem, is that you and I have a tendency to orient or to place our security in our wealth. We think the more we have, the safer we'll feel. And when we don't have as much as we think we ought to have, we begin to worry. And it seems that no matter what, whether you have enough or whether you have not enough at all, money is always demanding our affection and our attention. And it's with that in mind that I think it's no wonder that the Bible often refers to money. It personifies money as a false god. Money is not intrinsically bad. It's how we view money. It's how we use money that can be so destructive. Wealth is not a bad thing. But when it is something that demands our attention over and above God, it's no longer a tool. It becomes a false god, an idol. Think about it. Throughout his ministry, Jesus constantly taught his disciples that they could either worship God or money, mammon. It's impossible to do both at the same time. Our hearts only have so much emotional capital that they can give. When we give our attention, affection, and allegiance to money, we simply don't have anything left to give to God. And I think this very issue seems to be at the heart of what Jesus taught throughout his ministry about our relationship as his followers to money. We're going to read Luke 12, verses 13 through 34 together today. If you have a Bible and want to follow along, you're invited to turn there now. You can follow along on the PowerPoints as well. You'll notice that this reading begins with a parable. And immediately following the parable, Jesus launches into some very familiar words about worry. We're going to take a look at both the parable and Jesus' comments about anxiety. Hear the word of God. Again, this is Luke 12, 13 through 34. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Kick back.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.' And Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens." By the way, ravens were considered to be one of the most unclean animals in Jewish thought. So Jesus is referring to the most unclean animal, saying that even God takes care of ravens. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do a small thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all of these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, and unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. I've talked a lot about anxiety with you over the past, mainly because it's something that I deal with personally in my life, but also because it's an issue that we are facing as a society, an epidemic, really, that we're facing as a society. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States, affecting over 40 million adults over the age of 18, and those are just diagnosed cases. Think about all of the people in our country who are dealing with anxiety disorders and have not received a clinical diagnosis. As I said, I've struggled with anxiety for most of my life. I come from a long line of warriors. Some members of my family have almost perfected worry as an art. I've struggled with this. And I've struggled with not only the mental and emotional effects of anxiety, but the physical effects of it as well for most of my life. And things, as you know, got out of hand a few years ago when I ended up in the ER. Due to some digestive issues that I had been having. I thought I was dying. I thought I had stage 4 colon cancer or something like that. I thought that I was going to go into the ER and they were going to say, "Yep, you'll be dead tomorrow." They prescribed me some anti-anxiety medications, told me to manage my stress, to eat healthier, to exercise more. And it helped. See, we fret so much about things that are completely out of control that we whip ourselves up into a frenzy like that. And stories like mine are becoming more and more common each and every day. We have to understand as Christians, we can't just pray away anxiety, okay? And I believe that part of the way we deal with mental health comes from clinical help. Some people certainly do need medication to help balance themselves. Some people just need to get more healthy habits into their lives, exercise and healthy eating. But some of us have to also understand that as Christians, we have an additional resource to all of that comes to us in who God is. You see, Jesus would not have taught about anxiety if this was not a widespread human problem. We shouldn't think that this is an issue that we just deal with in 21st century America. It's something that people dealt with, obviously, in first century Israel as well. Why would Jesus have taught about it if that weren't the case? N.T. Wright says this in one of his commentaries. He says, many of Jesus' hearers only had just enough to live on, and there was always a prospect that one day they wouldn't have even that. Most of them would have perhaps one spare garment, but not more. As with many in today's world, one disaster, the family breadwinner being sick or injured, could mean complete destitution. You see, for us, that worry, whether we're worried about money or something else, that worry is always born out of uncertainty, out of the what-ifs of life. What if the breadwinner loses his or her job? What if the stock market crashes and your retirement fund crashes as a result? What if your car dies and you don't have enough to do the repairs or to buy another vehicle? What if the prognosis is bad? What if the worst things that you can possibly imagine end up happening? None of us have the ability to predict or even really control the future as much as we would like to think that we can. And it's in those moments when we realize how little control that we have that fear and fret begin to grab a hold. And I think that's what's going on in today's passage, right? There's this man who's fearing and fretting about his inheritance. Jesus is teaching a crowd of thousands, and as he was speaking, a man who was worried about his inheritance interrupted Jesus and said, "What if my brother doesn't share with me what's rightfully mine?" He interrupted Jesus, and Jesus used that occasion to teach him. Now, we might think that this was rude for the man to just break into this situation and say, "Hey, this is what I'm dealing with. Can you resolve the issue for me?" But it really was not rare for a person in this time to go to a rabbi and have them resolve a legal dispute, because the law and religion were very much intertwined in Jesus' culture. So the man wants Jesus to fix the problem for him. He thinks that Jesus has the legal authority to do so, and Jesus probably did have the legal authority to do so. The man was so anxious about what the future held, afraid of what would happen if he didn't receive his inheritance. He thought that money would make him feel safe, so he interrupted Jesus and demanded legal assurance that the money would be given to him. But instead of just straight up resolving the dispute, Jesus turned the question into a teachable moment and told this parable about a man who hoarded all of his resources. And his desire, I mentioned here that he wanted to just kick back. He thought he could retire in comfort and use the wealth that he had built up to take it easy. But before he could even use what he had built up for himself, he died. And Jesus said, to conclude the parable, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God." I find myself in that man a lot, and maybe you do too. I know in my own life I work so hard to accumulate and even hoard resources just in case things go south. I joked about toilet paper earlier, but that was a real problem back last March, wasn't it? People were so afraid of toilet paper running out that you couldn't even find it in stores because it was being hoarded. We find security in our wealth and in our stuff. But the fact remains that nothing is guaranteed to any one of us. Everything that we build up for ourselves could be stolen. It could be lost. It could be destroyed in an instant. And even worse than that, we could die before we get to use our resources. How ironic is that? We feel so anxious about the future, so we try to make ourselves feel secure by accumulating earthly treasures. But those treasures are so vulnerable. Even though we're exhausting so much time and energy worrying about and attempting to accumulate stuff, there's this moment of clarity, at least I know in my own life, where I recognize I can't even take all this stuff with me when I die. So why do I have it all? Nobody's going to care about it when I die. Nobody cares about the little toys or action figures that I have collected through the years. Those are things that are meaningful to me, not to my family, not to my friends. And so we work so hard to secure ourselves in our stuff and in our wealth that can be taken away. We know that it can be taken away. And so the end result is just more anxiety. And so the question remains, how do we deal with our worry? If money and stuff is not the answer, how do we deal with our anxiety and our worry in this world? Well, according to Jesus, we can begin simply by confronting that false god of mammon, repenting of our idolatry, and by investing our attention, our affection, and our allegiance in eternal things rather than temporal things. Wealth and treasures on this earth can perish so easily, and because of that, they will always end up disappointing us. They will always end up disappointing us. I love my house, but do you know how frustrating it is to own a house? I am grateful for my house. But if I have to do another repair, guess what? I'm going to have to do another repair. The things that we have, the stuff that we own, will always disappoint us in one way or another. And that just causes more stress and more worry in the long run. But God is eternal. And those who build their treasures in him will never find themselves disappointed. Following the parable in verses 16 through 21, Jesus talks about how much God cares for things like ravens and grass and flowers. And the fact of the matter is that none of those things has to worry about food or whether or not they'll be taken care of. They're just taken care of. They don't worry because they're valuable to God, and God takes care of them. God takes care of animals and plants because he loves them. And if God cares for animals and plants because he loves them, how much more do you think he cares for us, beings made in his own image? I think it's so important to recognize that throughout his ministry, whether we're talking about the Lord's Prayer as we did last week or here in this passage, Jesus, the Son of God, is always referring to the first person of the Trinity as Father. It's so important that Scripture frequently refers to God as a divine parent, because that title, God our Father, reveals who God is deep down in his nature and in his character. Think of the best human father figure that you can think of. Might be your own dad, maybe someone else. God the Father is kind of like that, but just immeasurably better. He's absolutely perfect. He knows everything. He's powerful enough to take care of our every need, and his love has absolutely no boundaries. And as a father, God is utterly concerned with our well-being, his children. He cares about us. He provides for our every need. Our Father holds all things together. Our Father sustains all things by his powerful word. Our Father purposely maintains our lives to serve his good purposes. And sometimes I fully believe with all of my heart, God takes care of us in ways that we are not even aware of. So we come back to our question, how do we overcome our worry in this world, especially when it comes to money? I think we overcome worry simply by focusing our attention on things that are eternal, by focusing on God himself rather than things that are temporal. Possessions aren't bad. Wealth is not bad, but if we place our ultimate security in them, we're going to be disappointed. We need to place our ultimate security in God. We overcome our worry by trusting that God will take care of our needs. That's what the Lord's Prayer is all about. We talked about that last week. God will provide for every need. And we overcome our worry simply by striving to become rich in God, by giving him, not money, our attention, our affection, and our allegiance. We're rich in God, actually, not by hoarding our resources, but by giving our resources to help others who are in need, by giving our money in support of the purposes of God's kingdom. Instead of hoarding, we seek to be sacrificial with how we give. And if you can do that, if you can locate your riches in God himself, I promise you, you will worry less. This has absolutely worked for me. And I know that it will for you too. So if you're worried today, remember who God is. Remember how faithful he has been to you in the past. And trust that he will be utterly faithful to you, not only in the present, but for eternity as well.